Hello and welcome along. My name's Paul Richmond and today I am in conversation with the lovely John Campbell. So John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I have spent the last 30 odd years working for professional service organizations. Probably the first 2/3 of that was as FD or CFO of top 50 law firms, where we covered the usual sort of stuff of making people record their time, acquisitions, mergers. Working capital incentive schemes have featured highly, both failed ones where a partner said to me, "John, why do I want to do this? I'm earning more money than I ever thought possible." So I thought to myself, what I need is a good recession. The next one, the worst, was actually in 2009.
It was your fault. You brought it on us. 2008.
Investigations, loss of income claim following an IRA bomb, so some quite unusual areas. Oh, and of course, a failed boardroom coup. But the more interesting work has actually been as a consultant, which I've been doing for nearly 10 years now. And again, one of those was helping a top US law firm manage their working capital, where we achieved record billings and collections 2 years in a row.
So where does the whole process begin? Is that sort of once you've kind of scoped the work and everybody knows what they're doing and you come to talk about price, or is it any earlier than that?
It starts right at the beginning when the client rings you up and says, we'd like you to do, this is the transaction that we're doing, we'd like you to quote. That's when the whole thing starts, the client conversation. And the client conversation is exactly that. 80% of your time should be spent listening. And if you're lucky enough to be able to do it face to face, make sure you make notes.
Do you find, have you come across instances where perhaps partners have gone in to do some work for a client and they have fallen foul of not listening to the client at the briefing stage?
A frequent banana skin, if you like, is where the partner goes in knowing what they're going to do and delivering what they're going to do without establishing exactly what the client needs and wants. And you need to, and pricing, when a bit later down the cycle, you'll be sort of going away and pricing that matter up. Now, if you've just got in and said, this is what we're going to do, you're not picking up all that information and feedback from the client about how important this transaction is. If this is a transaction that will say they're acquiring another organization, it gives them a whole new product line that they can actually sell through their infrastructure, and puts them from number 20 up to number 2 or 3. That's making a significant difference. They're not interested in having a cheap job done. They want the job done properly. And just finding out what value, how important it is, how important certain aspects are. For example, does the client want regular updates? That takes a bit more time. If it takes a bit more time, it costs a bit more. Or does the client, is it one of these things where the regulator has said, you've got to do this? They don't really want to do it. It's a necessary evil. They don't want to spend lots of money. They just want that job completed. So in that circumstance, you'd be looking at the lower comfort levels that go with the job.
And that's sort of in terms of the mistakes that people make when they do that first broad scoping, what kind of things do people miss out on? Because I always think that if you do very well, you're really looking to the client, listening to the client, and giving them what they want. And that's what they always say. Best thing about client service: listen to the client, give them what they want. And there is a difference between what they want and what they need. And that's where an expert really becomes very valuable. But it might be worth just thinking about that sort of narrowing of the broad scope and sort of refining that to the sort of what the client really needs for a successful outcome.
Well, I think, you also want to be finding out information that's going to be helping you as well. So, is the business profitable? How are they doing this year? Where does it actually fit in the full business? In their business plan. Which other firms are they talking to? Because that will give you an idea of price.
Right.
If they're talking to ABC accountants, that might suggest a lower price than if they're talking to PwC, who are probably one of the most expensive.
Yep.
If price
should it, I mean, and do you think that's a warning sign to people if you know that some of the opposition is, let's say, not in your peer group, but they're still talking to them? Do you think that's one of the sort of bid, no bid, if you like, we shouldn't be going for this kind of signals?
I think it certainly is, but don't be afraid to ask. Just ask the question. Why have you asked us? This isn't our. We wouldn't ordinarily be involved in this. What is it about us that particularly attracted you? And ask them. What are they going to say? They're hardly going to say, "Well, we're not going to tell you that," or that we heard you were really cheap.
Well, no, it's interesting because they're probably going to say, you've been recommended to somebody else that I know professionally. And it might be you particularly were recommended. At that point, do you think people should bring up pricing, and say, well, we are good. However, it's likely that we're going to be considerably more expensive than your previous advisors or local or regional firm, if that's the kind of positioning. Because I think a lot of lawyers are very afraid of this. I think commercially, anyone who's running a business, it's the first thing you do. How much is it going to cost me? Can I have a discount? Whereas I think professionals are almost educated to think, we don't really want to discuss money because we really want to discuss the matter at hand. And that's a kind of dirty side issue that people try and avoid.
Try and not talk about price, but talk about value. When you start talking about price, people automatically, and there's lots of books about the subject, etc., they automatically go into negotiation mode. So talk about value, and what's the value of this transaction? How important is it to you? Is it a treading water transaction, or is it a breakthrough kind of transaction? That will give you some sort of, you could ask them, what sort of budget do you have for this? There's, no reason why you shouldn't ask that. But try, if you move directly into, how much did you think, were you prepared to pay for this? Immediately people go, right, I'm prepared to pay X, but I'm going to deduct Y, and tell them that. So
yes, it's unlike you won't get the honest truth, because they'll think there might be a cost overrun. If you think it'll be 50,000, 100,000, whatever it is, add the noughts, they're probably going to tell you it's 40 or 80, because they want a little bit of wiggle room if they're going to get some additional work there. So it is all about them understanding exactly what they need and what their outcome is going to be, what a good outcome looks like, and what it will mean to them as an organization or an individual.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which means
and
if you
how it sits within the business overall. And I was thinking before we started about tenders. And remember, it's the GC that has invited you to this tender. And actually, when you're presenting at the tender, part of you is presenting on behalf of the GC. You could well be in the situation where the managing director turns around afterwards and says, "Why on earth did you get them in?" So actually, it's in the GC's interests for you to perform well. So they will, 9 times out of 10, be very happy to talk to you. And I've had firms say to me, well, it's a tender, we can't go back. Why not just try picking the phone up? I actually ran a tender, had some accountants, we were retendering our audit. We had 4 firms, 3 firms actually picked the phone up and spoke to me, clarifying certain areas. 1 firm didn't. The firm that didn't was sitting there telling us how well we'd done with our working capital. Well, we hadn't. Our work in progress had gone up. The problem was they hadn't noticed that we'd changed our year end. So it was a 13-month period. I would have explained that. So, there's no harm. It's not a sort of indication of, weakness or whatever. It's actually showing an interest.
And there is sometimes, far be it from me to say any lawyer might have ego, but there is potentially that risk that sometimes at partner level, you worry about losing face if you pick the phone up and make that call. And yet actually it is the one thing that says to the prospect, I'm interested enough to clarify something because I really want to make a good first impression when we come and do our pitch. And I think
sorry.
I was going to say it's even more important now. Yeah.
The next aspect of understanding and scoping the matter. It's not the back of an envelope. Oh, we usually do that for X pounds. It's sitting down and working out what you need to do. And if you can, sit down with a client and say, or ring the client up and say, we've scoped it, but I'd just like to run it past you. I'm popping past your office or whatever, and later on this afternoon. Any chance of catching 30 minutes just to run through it? You're showing an interest in them. It's not help. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you tell me what you want? This is the outline. If you can get the client to actually sit down and input into your scope, it's less likely the client is going to turn around and say, well, that's not what we wanted.
No.
So
I have heard a number of stories of people who've taken the brief, read the tender, and then scoped a matter, and the client has found that they were between a little bit and significantly out of whack with what they really wanted. So, a lot of people who are writing tenders, the advice is, don't ever put a proposal to a client until you've gone through the scope with them. Create a discussion document, don't call it a proposal, whatever, and sit down with them and say, this is what we've heard, this is what we understand you want from this deal, or from the work that we're going to do. And really, for the sake of 20 minutes, because you can do it these days with a Zoom call, you can pick up the phone and go through it, and just for that 20 minutes of quality time, you get to hear all the vocal inflection that the client gives you when they are listening to what you're proposing or when they're reviewing that document that you sent over. And I think that kind of feedback is priceless, because you hear them pause over something and go, yeah, you put that in, and you immediately know they're thinking, that's probably not an essential part of what we need to do. And you may have put it in because you thought it was, which means you don't quite understand the direction of travel. So that's a brilliant and simple thing to do. How many people do you think do that in circumstances that they could do, in your experience?
What I always find interesting is the people that do it are actually the big hitters in the firm generally.
Okay.
They are the ones that will, it's just a normal step for them. It's those that are not so good at pricing that will not do it, that will keep it all to themselves and hope that they've got it right. Whereas, you know, when I look back at a recent assignment, a partner, we were working on a tender, looked at a couple of aspects, and we agreed that we needed clarification. And he said, well, I'll just ring them. I'll ring them this afternoon and we'll have another chat tomorrow. So, you know, there was no question about it. You know, we want to get it right.
No head scratching. I think there is a fear of failure. And I think some people would not want to pick up the phone because they fear that rejection of thinking, I might have got it wrong. And yet, as long as you view that as a first straw man, if you like, say, look, I'm going to give you a call, let's just talk it through. I expect it to be wrong because I put some things in there I'm not quite sure you need. And I can hear whether you think that's a great idea and I'll pay a bit extra for it. Or, yeah, we don't really want that. So that's a great thought, to actually call the client and expect it. And I think if you say, I'll always call the client, it sets the bar rather than making it a real exception.
The other, sort of trick, if you like, is breaking your price down into, the various steps. And as you've scoped it into these steps, you talk to the client, and the client will give you an idea of which areas they think are important. And, if you price high an area that they aren't particularly interested in, not sure whether they really need it, that makes them think that you're ripping them off. If you actually price high an area that they value, they're unlikely to think that you're ripping them off. They're likely to think, well, it might be a bit pricey, but I knew it was going to be expensive.
And that comes back to the value point you raised, which is it's expensive, but I'm getting value because I can see what they're going to be doing for me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm going to say, I think we should round it up about there. So I just want to thank you very much indeed for your time. Been really fascinating. There's loads of top tips in there, which we will set out separately in a little document, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.